Hi, I'm Jeffe, and I'm going to have Kim click over the slides for me, so if you can click. This is way too small to read, I know, and you already got the introduction. Henry, how are you? I'm going to be doing this as I spot people in the crowd, sorry. So at any rate, I've been in the writing business for a little over 20 years now. I started out as a writer of nonfiction in essays. I did that random little poetry thing. And now I write mostly fantasy and write fantasy romance. And most recently, I guess I don't have it in my bio yet, but I got to be a Rita finalist for one of my recent books from RWA. So that was really exciting for me. Here's a list of some of my books. I haven't put all of them on there yet. At this point, I'm a hybrid writer, meaning that I work in both traditional publishing and I also self-publish, which I really do believe is the way to go these days, and we'll talk more about that. I'm an eggs in many baskets kind of gal, and self-publishing has really helped me because I'm now a full-time writer. I am making my living as a writer. But that can be a very up and down income kind of thing. And having the self-published works with those monthly royalties from the various retailers makes a big difference so far as being able to do things like pay the mortgage and the electric bill. So let's start out first. I'm going to define terms. And this may seem like overly simplistic, but you would be amazed how many people confuse editors and agents. And it's one of the things that really annoys them. As you can imagine, because they have really, really different jobs. And if somebody gets it mixed up, then they know right away that you don't know what you're doing. And so you always want to, as a writer, sound like you understand the business. And if you want someone to be your editor or your agent, you want to sound intelligent about that. So the most important thing is an agent represents your work, all right? They don't do any publishing on their own. Now, occasionally an agency gets involved in having a publishing arm, but in that case they change roles and they become the publisher. An agent represents your work. They get a percentage of what you make, so they do work for the writer. An editor, and nowadays we have multiple meanings for the word editor, right? So I'm going to talk about editors in two different ways. In the traditional publishing sense, first and foremost, an editor acquires work for publication. In other senses, editors perform different levels of publishing, different levels of editing, and we'll talk about that more. But when we're talking about the difference between querying an agent and querying an editor, is an agent would represent you, whereas an editor would buy your work for publication. All right, so let's talk about agents first. They usually work for a literary agency. An agency can go from one person to the really huge ones. I don't know, probably have 100. Usually it's more like 5, something like that. Sometimes an agent will freelance or they own their own agency. So the agent who is a partner or owns the agency will also have their own clients, and then they'll also have tiers of agents under them. Agenting is a business where there's a lot of kind of apprenticing time. So agents will start out as interns or assistants, and then they will gradually rise in the agency. That's their career ladder, where they will become like a partner in the agency, or maybe they'll branch off and open their own agency. Agents make their money from selling your books. And this is really important to remember, because this is their livelihood. They only make money if they sell your books or if they sell additional rights for your books. A lot of agents out there work entirely on this commission. And so a brand newbie agent, which is a lot of the times the ones you're going to be querying, because those are the ones who are actively acquiring, those are the ones who are out there hunting for authors to represent, they are only going to be able to pay their own rent or electric bill if they sell your books. And that's important to remember, because as much as they may love doing what they do, and they do love it because this is not a fast way to get rich by any means, they will only be able to do well financially if they're able to sell books. Typically it's 15%. If it's more than 15%, I would seriously question that. Occasionally it's less. Often if an agent works for an agency, they may only get 10%. They might get 12%, and they give the other piece of the percentage to the overall agency. Every agency is different. I never knew this when I was first querying, that there's this huge variety in how they might be employed. Some agents actually do receive a salary from their agency, and so the royalty percentages, at least for a while, are gravy for them, and really that's ideal because it makes them a little bit less panicked. So we often talk about, as writers, writers will caution you, and sometimes your well-meaning friends will caution you and say, don't take that from that agent. Remember, they work for you. And okay, this is true. They are supposed to be on your team. They make their money if you make money. But they also have a larger world to consider. They have to maintain their professional reputation. An agent is only as good as their reputation. And I recently ran into, I'm on my third agent now, and I'll talk about sort of my story with that. And remind me if I don't come back to it later, but I recently ran into a really great example of how my current agent has a really good reputation. And it's something that's critical for her to maintain, because her reputation is what sells my books too, not just mine. So when agents say things that frustrate writers, and we have all been in this chair where the agent's like, well, you know, I like it, but I just don't love it, right? And you're like, well, what does it take to love it? They have to love it because they have to be able to shine their best at selling it. And it's not an easy business. I mean, just imagine if your business was continually having to schmooze people and talk up these books that you're trying to get them to buy. I mean, we don't like doing that as writers very much. As an agent, it's other people's books, and so their real livelihood is resting on you. It's a very high-pressure business. All right, editors. This is sort of the list of all the different kinds of editors that I could think of, and maybe you guys can think of more. On the left side, this is sort of the traditional publishing ladder. There are acquiring. These are all acquiring agents at some level. Maybe the lower tiers don't acquire. So you have at the head of the publishing house, your really high-paid people are going to be like the editorial director or the executive editor. That's kind of top of the ladder for most editors, unless they go on to start their own publishing house and be CEO or some such. Then you have like senior editors, you have assistant editors, and then they sort of flip it around so that you know, like editorial assistant or editorial intern, that's entry level. A lot of times interns and editorial assistants, they're assisting these other people. They're assisting the executives. They might be assisting anyone on up. But those editorial assistants and editorial interns, even though they're like 20 years old a lot of the times, they're fresh out of college, and it can be difficult if you are someone who is farther along in life and you're talking to someone who is less than half your age or even a third your age, and they have all of this power that it feels like they shouldn't have over you, which I know can be frustrating also. But these people are gold, because They're struggling too. They're in their first job a lot of the time. They deal with horrible people every day because these are the people that their bosses don't want to deal with. So they're being yelled at on the phone all day long. They're being yelled at via email. They're constantly being accused of not knowing what they're doing, and maybe they don't, and they're still trying to figure it out. If you are nice to these editorial assistants and editorial interns, they will be your friends and they will reward you. Because someday, that lowly intern who's 21 is going to be 50 and she's going to be editorial director of her publishing house. And I swear to God, that's true. So, it's sort of that thing about be careful on your way up, it's... All right, so then on the other side, and I am going to try to talk about self-publishing also, because I do believe that's a viable thing to be doing either alternatively or in tandem. You have different levels of editing. There's a developmental or content editor. That's the person who works on your story, who helps you develop the story into what it needs to be. It's a very big picture look. Then you go down to a production editor. Often after if you're at a publishing house, after you finish your content or developmental edits, they'll hand it over to the production editor, who is then in charge of getting the book all the way into print and making sure that it's right and perfect. At that point, you go through line edits, which are just what they sound like, where they go through line by line by line and pick out all of the little things. Maybe this is the wrong word. Maybe you shouldn't use a semicolon here. Then you go down to copy editing, which is even more persnickety. Copy editors are sort of a whole other class of human being. God bless them, because they've pulled me out of some very potentially bad mistakes, but they can also make you completely crazy because they are, yeah. And then finally you get down to a proofreader. And a proofreader will obviously be the last person to make sure that there's no typos, which there inevitably are. It's a law of the universe. All right, so when you're querying, the most important thing is to know your stuff, okay? And that's part of why you're here, so that's great. I'm amazed there's so many people here on a holiday weekend. You need to know, what are you trying to do? And if you are pitching an editor or agent in person, they will often ask you what your career plans are. What are your long-term goals? And when you're a newbie writer, this can be really hard to answer, because you're sitting there going, I want to have my book published. It's a very clear, concise goal. But they want to know, what is your commitment to this? What's your overall plan? Are you planning to do you want totally traditional career? Are you willing to be hybrid? How much are you willing to reinvent yourself along the way? A lot of people publish 1 or 2 books and decide, they get to that goal and they're happy having a book, and then they're done. Because keeping going is just as hard as the initial parts. I hate to tell people that, because it's really, really hard when you're aspiring and you're querying and you want to get your first book published. But then, once you get your first book published, you get this whole other set of things, and it doesn't ever end. It takes a lot of commitment. I'm getting nodding over here. It takes a lot of commitment, a lot of persistence, and it is not the easiest way to make a living. And on the other hand, I'm going to say I think it's absolutely fantastic that I get to write books for a living. And I don't have to go to committee meetings or be on conference calls unless it's with people who want to buy my books. So it's a wonderful life, but it's also, if you like having a steady salary, and if you don't like having your health insurance taken away from you, then it's easier just to get a job. Just throwing that out. So there's lots of options these days. There's more options than ever before. You can go traditional publishing, you can go self-publishing, you can do both. You can go with what are the big 5, and then a small assortment of privately owned publishing houses. You can also go, there's a lot of digital first presses. Most of the big 5 also have digital lines first, which they are tending more and more to push brand new writers into those digital only lines just to see if they stick, and then they'll give you a print deal. There are still slush piles and over the transom opportunities. We'll talk about that to get your work in. You don't have to have an agent depending on what you want to do. But depending on what you want to do, you might really need an agent. So this is why you need to know these things. All right, so this is Know Your Stuff Part 2. Does anyone even know what a transom is anymore? All right, what's a transom?
It's the glass part of the top of the door.
That's right, that's
and
right.
And it opens.
It opens, okay. So what's the significance of over the transom? Throw it in, because this used to be literally true at New York Publishing, that people would submit manuscripts, like even Henry might have over the weekend finished printing out his manuscript and crept into the William and Morrow building on Fifth Avenue and found the correct office and threw his manuscript over the transom in the hopes that someone would pick it up off the floor and read it. They did that, and people got published that way occasionally. The slush pile used to be literally a pile of paper manuscripts, right? And that's all the stuff. Slush has it's kind of true to its name. It's a fuzzy word, fuzzy concept. Slush kind of means anything that the editor wasn't expecting to get. So things from agents go into the slush pile also. Additional manuscripts from an author they already published but had not contracted the work for, that might go in the slush pile. Most editors are going to have kind of like we do with our to-be-read piles, right? You have your ones that you're probably never going to read, and then the ones that you really, really need to read, and the ones you absolutely have to read because you're judging them for a contest. Editors are going to have that same kind of prioritization. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to be on the slush pile, but you're hoping that you're not going to end up in that one that just keeps growing until they get sick of looking at it and they finally have their editorial intern throw it in the recycle bin. Oh wait, could you go back one? I'm sorry, I jumped too fast. Oh yes, because this is here. So the thing is publishing has changed and continues to change at a rapid rate. And you have to keep up. And I know that's like, here we are out in New Mexico, and it kind of feels like, how the hell can we keep up with what's going on in New York City? Fortunately, we have the internet. Things change really fast. For example, everything is electronic. There are not paper slush piles anymore. There is no over the transom. I mean, maybe you're going to throw your 8.5-inch floppy disk over the transom, which is, I'm trying to make a point there that would be a terribly dinosaur thing to do, right? Nobody uses jump drives to transfer manuscripts. They don't use CDs. They don't use floppies. You don't send it on paper. What do? You email it. You send it via email attachment, and you send it via Microsoft Word. So I don't want to hear, this is like, I'm really going to be truthful with you guys, because I know that there are people out there who are like, I don't want to have to learn Microsoft Word. And it's like, I'm sorry, you have to. Just, if you don't know it, learn now, because even if you use Scrivener or something and it translates to Word for you, or you're using some other, what George R. Martin still uses, WordStar. If you're making billions of dollars, you can use a dinosaur program and they'll do it for you. Unless you're George R. Martin, you have to learn Word. Because even if you translate it to Word and you've got it coming back from you from your editor, guess what? It's going to be marked up in track changes in Word. And you're going to have to go through it and accept or reject changes. You're going to have to be able to reply to comments. So if you don't know how to do this, just start practicing now, because it's industry standard. Yep.
Just a quick comment, and it has to do with Windows. I'm a Mac guy, and when I was doing tech writing and editing, they're slightly different. The Mac version, it will not translate. You have to take it seriously by letting Windows work.
All right. So, and I'm a Windows person partly for that reason, so that's good to know. Have an opportunity to use Windows Word, yes.
There's a website, Allison Training, gives a free tutorial on how to use Word, and it's very well done.
Well, okay, so Allison Training
Just You
website,
type in Allison and...
Allison Training,
Right.
and it'll teach you how to use Word, good tutorial. And there was another hand, yes.
Hi, I just wanted to know, what about a PDF file? Because you don't go that way.
No. Okay, yeah. She asked about a PDF file, and a PDF is, that's Adobe. You can convert your Word file or other files to PDF, which basically what it does is it freezes the file. It makes it into a picture, essentially. I mean, there's variations on this, but that's the simple way of looking at it. If you're sharing, if you don't want someone to muck with your file, PDF is a good way to send it. If you're sending it to an agent or an editor who want to muck with your file, they won't be happy with you if you send it in a PDF. They want to be able to mark it up and do track changes. Every once in a while, I mean, there is one editor in New York who I could think of, there might be more, but she's really famous for it, is she makes her authors do paper. And if they don't send their, yeah, I know, it's big eyes. If they don't send their manuscript on paper, she prints it out and she marks it up with her red pen. And she's a total pain in the ass because of it. But, this is like her, and she's an editor at a big house, and so if you want to work with her, that's what you do. But otherwise, what's the take-home message there? Learn to use Word. Another thing, and learn to use email professionally. I mean, this is, in this day and age, and I know that this is like, some of us are better at technology than others, but, we've had email for 20 years now, right? 25 years? So if you don't know how to use email, that's another thing you have to learn to use. If you tell people you don't know how to use email, that's like saying you don't know how to put a stamp on a letter. Okay, that's the modern translation. Learn how to use email. Have a professional email name. Don't have an email that has your spouse's name in it also. Because when you are querying, which you are going to be doing almost entirely by email now, you don't want your email to be going back to Mrs. John Sutter. You don't want it to be going back to Harry and Kelly. All right? Because they're looking for you in their inbox. They're looking for your author name. Have an email with your author name. In many ways, this can be intimidating, but it means that the access is much better. For those of us who have been around for a while, we remember the old days when you had to mail off your 100 pages or even your entire manuscript with your self-addressed stamped envelope, and then you would wait months or years for it to come back. Now you might send a query, and if you hit the agent or editor when they're looking at queries, you might get an answer back in half an hour. And that is not a bad thing, because it means that they are actively looking at their email, and they do make decisions like this. They have to, because some people get 100 queries a day or more. And they look at it and they go through, and they mostly go, no, 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 no. Oh, yes. Okay, and you want to be the, oh, yes. And then the other thing is that self-publishing has changed the landscape. Gone are the days when agents and editors would hide in their hotel rooms at conferences. And some of you who've been around for that, remember how they'd like turn their tags around so that they'd be anonymous so people wouldn't bug them? And they would hide in their hotel rooms, and they would be sometimes very superior acting. And there's a few like that still. Some of that's just, people are people. But that has changed because most of them are much hungrier than they used to be. And this is a great thing for writers, is that we have much more power than we used to have, because it used to be you could only get published if you had an agent who sent it to an editor, or unless you snuck into the building and put your manuscript over the transom. But that was rare, right? We know what Henry did, how he is. But now, if they won't publish your book, you can self-publish it and maybe do well. And we'll talk about caveats on that. But it does give you more power in negotiating. And that's something you should always remember. Okay, now we can Go on. The other thing that all of this has done with the internet is it has made this a very small world. And publishing is a very small world within that small world. And this is something that's really, really important to remember. They keep databases of their queries. And if you query, as soon as you query, usually it'll be like their intern or some other assistant will go through and they plug in who that email came from and what project you were querying. And they keep track of that. And when they look at a new one, they pull it up in their database and they look to see if you queried them before. And they might have notes about you. If they're smart, they keep notes about you. They might say promising, but meh. Or they might say, seemed like a creeper. You don't want to get that tag where they think you seem like a creeper. And we're going to talk about this. Because it's very easy as an aspiring writer to be creepy. We have all been there. You don't mean to do it, but we all get so excited, right? You get so excited because this is your chance and you're really talking to the person you want to talk to them about your book and you come off creepy. Okay? You want to do everything you can not to be creepy. Gossip is instantaneous and delicious. You would not believe the way these people gossip. And yes, they do. They all sit in the bar and they gossip about creepy writers. I have heard stories you would not believe. Because a lot of times I'm sitting in the bar, hanging out and drinking with the editors and the agents, which I highly recommend. Even if you don't like to drink, have your seltzer water there, sit there and talk, because people will say things in person that they will never, ever, ever put on the internet. And if you are smart, you will do the same thing. And I'm going to tell you this story. I'm glad I put this note in here. So there's this author, which I'm telling you this in person. I would not put this on the internet, but I'm not going to tell you their name. But this author received a 6-figure deal for their first book. It was a 2-book deal, and I think he got, it was at least $100,000. It might have been more. Big publishing house. And that's a sign of huge confidence, right? That's a big deal. And they were very, very excited about this book. And this guy has an ego to match the deal that he got and thinks that he's pretty hot stuff. Which it turns out he's not so much, although the book got a lot of buzz, largely because of this big deal. He also, it didn't sell well. And in fact, I know someone else who was published through the same editor at the same house. And see, and this is what you need to do, is make friends and you'll get to know people and you'll know these stories. And her book came out at the same time. Much, much smaller deal, much less buzz, much less marketing and press. Her book has sold much better than his, which actually it turns out that almost nobody knows. I only know it because an agent friend of mine told me about it over drinks. I swear to God. So this guy was apparently on Twitter one day. Most of the industry is on Twitter. Even if you don't like using Twitter, it's worthwhile to look at it. You can choose the streams that you follow. If you follow mine, I'm at Jeffe Kennedy. I have a list. You can go to my page and you can see lists. I have a public list of agents and editors. And you can look at that list. You can just follow that list and see what they're talking about. I only follow agents and editors who I think are legit and decent human beings, because there are ones who are not out there. So I do try to curate that, because a lot of people do go and look at it, and those are all people I think are decent. So anyway, this guy was on Twitter, and he was talking about how hard it is to be an author. So hard, because everybody thinks he's done so well because he got this huge, well-publicized deal. But he lives in New York City, and he has bills to pay, and when you get in advance, you don't get the whole $100,000 right off. You know, you get like half on signing, and then you get another piece on delivering the first book, and then another piece on delivering the second book, and how he's having a hard time because, you know, he has to have time to write, but, you know, he doesn't have that much money. And so he did this whole chain of tweets about this where he's being educational, and he finally gets to the end, and his editor who is, of course, also on Twitter, pops in and replies and says, well, if you weren't 6 months late on your second book, you might have more money, so maybe get off Twitter and write. Right? And the agent who told me this, who is not my agent, but one of my favorite people, she was in her office, and the agent who's the head of her agency was in the office next door, and they both saw this tweet at the same time, and both of them went, oh, burn! So, small world, everybody is watching, everybody is interested, everybody knows the story, and now you do too. Your numbers are at their fingertips. They're going to know exactly how many books you sold, whether you self-publish or traditionally publish. There are no secrets. Your social media is at their fingertips, so be professional what you post online. Be positive. If you're on there bitching about how you've been rejected 4,632 times and maybe your book really sucks, you probably don't want them to see you saying that, right? Because they're going to say, oh, well, that person sucks, right? Don't be paranoid. This whole thing about, like if you slip up and use the wrong verb tense, that a lynch mob of people on Twitter will pile on you and your reputation will be forever ruined. No. I mean, try not to be a jerk. Try not to float opinions that you know are going to be controversial. I would never say don't stand up for what you believe in, but try not to be a jerk about it. Be smart. Have discretion. Don't say something on the internet that you wouldn't say at a professional cocktail party. And that's even with that caveat that people will say in person what they won't say online. All right, so my story. I started out querying. At first I had an essay that won a prize and ended up being published by University of New Mexico Press in an essay collection. That was back in 2004. I was not represented. It was sort of this very nicely serendipitous, also networking thing. I moved over to writing fiction, and I queried my little heart out. I queried for over 3 years. Got lots of requests, which was nice, and I didn't appreciate at the time. But I would invariably get back, I love your writing, have no idea how to market this. I ended up going with some digital first presses finally. I published with Lucid, Alora's Cave, Karina. One of my Karina books, an agent read, my first agent read that, and she tweeted me. She sent me a private message and said, are you represented, dear? And I said no, and she said, well, can we talk at RWA? And I said, yes, we could. She represented me, she sold my first 3 books. And a fourth. And she sold me to Kensington, and that was really great. In this case, she was not someone that I had picked out, right? She was not my dream agent. She was not the person that I bled tears to try to get to represent me. She came to me, which was great. She had read my book, she loved it, I knew she loved my work. She wanted to represent me, fabulous. And I would have stayed with her, except that she kind of went into a life death spiral. I mean, her husband had an affair, and she did sort of this annihilation of her life, poured gas on it and set fire, and lost weight and quit smoking and moved, and she moved agencies. And she went to an agency that had a bad contract. It was one that I told her, I said, I can't sign this. And she was like, oh yeah, we'll fix it. But she was in such a bad place in her life, and this is important to remember, as agents are people too, and agents, that sometimes this happens, they go nuts. So ultimately, I could not go with her. Now, what happens when you sign with an agent is you actually sign with the agency, not the person, not the actual person. So in this case, I had signed with Fuse Literary Agency, where she was a partner. She left. head partner, or one of the remaining partners at Fuse, Lori McLean, asked me to stay, which was flattering. It was really nice that she wanted me to stay. And she asked me to give a brand new agent in their agency, Connor Goldsmith, which is just a matter of record, if I would give him a whirl. And I figured he's young, he's hungry, I liked what he had to say. I was with Connor for 3 years, and I just changed in March. And this is kind of a salient story because this is again the power of networking, and I'll try to come back to this. But last summer at RWA conference, a friend of mine called, a writer friend, and she was a very successful self-publisher. And a friend of hers, I could tell you names, it won't matter. Her friend is Ilona Andrews, who is at Nancy Yost Literary Agency. And it turned out that this junior agent, Sarah Younger at Nancy Yost, really wanted to try to sign my friend and represent her. And my friend, being a fervent self-publisher who she had been burned in traditional publishing. It's kind of a long story, but one of those people who had a very bad experience. And she didn't want to do it, and she wanted my opinion. Do I need an agent? And I said, I think an agent can do things for you that you can't do for yourself, which is, I absolutely stand by that. And I said, well, let's see if she's here at the conference. So I looked her up, and coincidentally enough, Sarah was there at the RWA conference. So I stalked her for my friend in a non-creepy way. I walked around and I looked her up on Twitter, got her picture, asked around. Anytime I ran into pretty much anyone I knew, I would say, do you know what Sarah Younger looks like? And they would say yes or no. And I'd say, well, do you see her? And they'd look around the bar or whatever and say, no, I don't see her. I got to the Harlequin party and asked the little editorial interns who are the door dragons there, and they have their invitation lists, and they're all 22 and incredibly helpful, nice people, and they have to sit outside the party. They don't get to go in. They have to sit there with the invitation list. So if you chat with them for a while, they're really grateful. And I said, can you tell me if Sarah Younger is on the list? And the gal was more than happy to help me. She even had to go over and ask one of the other gals. And she said, yes, and she already checked in. Great, thank you. So I went and walked around the party, found Sarah by the cupcake bar, introduced myself, and she said, you followed me on Twitter today. And I said, yes, I did. And I said, I'm a friend of Grace's. And she said, you are? And I said, yes. And she asked me to introduce myself. And she said, well, let's grab a martini and sit and talk. And we talked about Grace, and we talked about her expectations. We met again the next day, and I got to know Sarah and liked her very much. My friend Grace ended up signing with Sarah. Sarah made her a 3-book, 6-figure deal 5 months later. In the beginning of this year, when I grew increasingly frustrated with my agent, and I can tell you reasons why I was. I'm kind of watching the time, so we'll have to be careful on that. I'm happy to share. Basically, he was not selling books for me. And there were other things going on. But I approached Sarah privately. I private messaged her on Twitter. I DM'd her. And I said, could we talk? Could we have a cell phone conversation? And I did have her cell phone number from meeting her at RWA and hooking up. And she called me on her cell phone and on my cell phone so that we had a completely off the record when she was at home, so she wasn't in the office. And I said, I'm thinking about leaving my agent. Would you be interested in representing me? It turned out she needed some, we talked for a while. She needed to do some research, which I knew meant actually going and reading my books. Turned out she'd already read my books and had them on her Kindle. She's like, I didn't realize you wrote this book. I love that book. Awesome. She now represents me. We're now fielding, we went on submission with like a dozen people, and we've got offers on the table from 3, and she's working them up. Okay, so she did more for me in 3 months than the other agent did for me in 3 years, is the short story. It's good to have the right agent. So there's some important parts of this story is a lot of the agents who I initially queried, these many, many moons ago, are still my friends. they were some of the people that I would stop in the bar and say, do you know what Sarah Younger looks like? I'm looking for Sarah Younger. And they'd be like, oh no, I'll tell her you're looking for her. It's really good to keep friends. Also, the agent who told me the story about the six-figure deal guy and the burn on Twitter, when I was last fall not happy with my agent, she and I were at a conference together, we were drinking together. You don't have to drink, but you know, it's like it's the new smoking. I don't know, there's a lot of conversations over wine. And I asked her some very pointed questions when it was just the two of us, and she said, no, it's not just you, you're not crazy, you should be expecting more than this, which was huge. I really needed that input from someone else. And I asked her then, I said, if I left my agent, would you be interested in representing me? And she said, in a heartbeat, which was huge also. And that was the kind of conversation I wouldn't be able to have any other way. And I ended up not going with her, just like I see you. I ended up not going with her because Sarah was a better fit, but the first gal was a good enough friend that I could call her, and I said, I'm gonna go with Sarah, I hope that you're not disappointed. And she said, no, because this means that we can still room at conferences and drink wine together and be friends. Right? Okay, question.
Okay, so my question is, do you have to completely divorce your current agent before you seek another? Or is it okay to basically flirt with another agent, see if that agent is
You
interested
flirt with them in the bar over wine and have flirtatious
and then,
conversations?
Yes, and then after the agent says she's interested in repping you, can you then go and fire the other? Or do you have to fire them first?
Well, obviously, I did not fire mine first. Okay, so she's asking about the order of things. According to the rules, ostensibly, this is like the, you can only, no simultaneous submissions, which works entirely for them and not for the author. You should absolutely simultaneously submit and screw them if they get annoyed. This is one of those things where they say, yes, you should absolutely separate with your previous agent before you go shopping. No, shop around first. Don't do it, obviously. Don't post it on Twitter saying, oh, I think my agent is such a jerk and I'm looking for a new one. Anyone interested? Don't do that. But you go to the conferences and you have private, in-person conversations with people, or you do it via private messenger. Make sure you really hit DM and not public tweet. You call them, and if you don't know their cell phone, you ask one of your author friends who has that agent and say, would she mind if I talk to her? And yes, I mean, I absolutely had it all lined up, and Sarah and I had agreed that she would represent me. We had gone through plans and all of this. I gave my 30 days notice to the agency as required by my contract.
And what if the contract is oral? Is it quicker, easy? If I have an oral contract with a New York agency, so can I just find another agent and tell the New York agent that we're over?
Yeah, if it's an oral contract, I don't think it exists. I mean, it's, yeah, it doesn't exist.
Oral contracts are valid from
What does the oral contract say?
and he's gonna rep me.
No. I'm sorry. If an agent represents you, you have a written contract. Otherwise, it's a thing where they can decide at any moment whether or not they want to represent you. In which case, yes, I would say you could absolutely go with someone else and say, sorry, it didn't work out. Another question?
When you're trying to get someone to represent you, you introduce yourself with your real name, or is it okay to use your pseudonym? Is there an order to that as well?
Oh, pseudonyms are such a kettle of fish. I would say, like initially use your pseudonym, but then you're going to want to fess up to your real name pretty soon. Definitely fess up to your real name when you sign the contract with them, because they're gonna have to know it for legal reasons.
I understand. Do they frown upon that though? If you don't just automatically have
Oh no, because they know we're all using pseudonyms. I mean, I don't, but that's a matter of course. They just know everybody has a couple names. So yeah, I mean, you can even just say, hi, I'm Jeffe Kennedy writing as Jennifer Paris. And that's an easy way to do it. But yeah, you know, if you go to a conference and you're really determined to use a pseudonym and you're planning to do all your social media under that pseudonym, just go by that name because you're not making people remember two names. But then later when you're doing the paperwork, you could say, you know, actually my name is, you know, Susie Banshee, and I thought that was a bad pen name. Yes.
If you already have a publisher, and you're approached about the film rights to your books, should you seek out a specifically media rights agent?
Okay, so should you get a media rights agent if you have a publisher and you've been asked about a film option? A lot of that depends on if your publisher owns the film rights.
No.
Okay.
You own the film rights.
Okay, so if you own the film rights and you don't have a literary agent,
No.
Yeah, I mean, you could go to a media agent, but if you go to an established literary agency, they're going to have people who handle film rights also, if the agent doesn't. And if you're getting film offers, it's probably a good idea to at least try the general agent route first, and then you can go strictly media. But a media agent is so specific that they're only going to be able to help you with that. And if you're at the point where you're getting film offers, it's probably a good idea to have an actual agent on your team. Okay, so I think we can go on, because I already talked about reputation. Oh, I'm sorry.
How about self-publishing? Do you have
One's what? First of all.
publishing, a place to self-publish or put on?
Well, if you self-publish, you don't have a publisher. You're doing it yourself.
Right. But which ones are the best ones?
Right, there's create space, what avenues.
Oh, you know, that's such a huge question. Yeah, let me try to come back to that, or we could talk after. Okay, so is there such a thing as a dream agent? I don't know if you guys follow, that somebody created Ryan Gosling as the dream literary agent. This one where he says, hey girl, don't those editors know a good thing when they see it? I sure do. And I love this one. Hey girl, she didn't request the full manuscript. I loved that query letter. Okay, there's no such thing as a dream agent. And a lot of people think, oh, I have to have this person. No, you don't. You need an agent who loves your work and will advocate for you. That's the most important thing. Sometimes you don't need an agent. Some editors can be queried directly. Don't use the same query letter for agents and editors. Okay, I know it's tempting. I would file them separately in different folders. I had my agent folder and I had my editor folder. What's the main reason? Here's the pop quiz portion. What's the main reason you can't use the exact same letter for an agent or an editor?
Because they gossip, they share information,
Share information.
and it's a different, they do different things.
They do different things, right? So I can't tell you how many times I hear agents and editors. The agents will say, if I get one more email that says, will you publish my book, I am going to put my eyes out with a fork, because agents don't publish. Conversely, editors get letters saying, I'm asking you to represent me. Makes them want to put out their eyes with a fork, not the response you want to get for your query, right? Use different ones. Yes, they do read them. And it's, you know, I hear people rant all the time, well, they don't even read those things. Yes, they do. They read them and they make notes on them. When you reply to a rejection, to a pass, first of all, you don't have to. It's nice to reply and say, tell me a good reply. What's a good reply to a rejection? Thank you for your consideration. Short and sweet. Just copy it down, paste it in there, resist the urge to say anything else. It's best advice you will ever get, because they trade stories of these. Oh yes, I've got another one where they, like people will get a book deal and then they email all the agents and editors who rejected them and say, boy, aren't you sorry now? Do you think they forget about that? No. And when you're going around looking for your next book deal, what do they think about you? Creepy. There was a hand up back here somewhere. Yes.
Would you consider trying to keep them on the line to ask them what it is you do to improve the work or what should be better?
Okay, so he's saying, can you ask what you could do to improve the work? I would say generally no. Unless they have left the door open for that, they might say, I would love to see your next project, or I feel like this could use more work. Then you could reply, but be very respectful of their time and realize that they already took the time to personalize their response, and just say, I would be appreciative of any further feedback you have. I really appreciate your time. And then if they do give it to you, don't argue with them, okay? Listen, just listen and take it. Yes?
Do all agents, if you have a particular genre that you work in, do you look for an agent who focuses on that?
Do you look for an agent in your genre? Absolutely, yes. That's part of having the right fit. If you want an agent who, and one of the best ways to find an agent, like part of the reason I asked Sarah if she would represent me and why she's a better fit for me than the other gal, is because Sarah did this great 3-book deal of my author friend who, we and I have a whole lot of overlap audience. We write essentially the same kind of genre and the same very specific subgenre. Okay, I'm going to try to get through some more slides here and then we'll take more questions. Yes. All right. This is an important thing for remembering how to deal. There's the rule of 3. You can be a brilliant writer. You can be easy to work with. You can deliver your manuscripts on time. You can meet 2 of these things and still be successful. If you're not meeting at least 2 of these 3, they are not going to want to work with you. It doesn't matter how freaking brilliant you are, if you're impossible to deal with, and if you turn your manuscripts in late, like Mr. Six-Figure Deal, you are making their lives hard. They don't like it. Okay, and let's see. I think we could probably skip some of this since we're running out of time, but for hiring an editor, if you're self-publishing, yes, you need an editor. There's no, I don't care how many books you've written, I don't care how wonderful you are. 2 of my favorite stories are Anne Rice and Pat Conroy, who both decided that they were too wonderful to need developmental editing and started turning out terrible books. Everybody needs an editor. And I'll skip the rest for now.
We can go after that.
Basically, listen to your editors. That's their job. This is important to remember. This is sort of back to the friends and enemies. We picture agents and editors like this, whereas really they are this. That one's really hard to see.
It's in a bar.
Yes, in a bar. It isn't. Well, it's actually a lunchroom. But okay, go ahead. Agents and editors, or agents in particular, have to have barracuda in them. You want an agent who has some barracuda in them. That's how they negotiate the good deals. You need someone who can be abrasive when necessary. Sounding confident is a job skill of theirs. They have to sound like they know what they're doing, otherwise no one believes them. They scrutinize you very, very carefully, but once they sign you, they should be solidly on your team. And it's very true that no agent is better than a crappy one or a bad fit. Remember with editors that they are under tremendous pressure. Their job performance depends on how well the books they acquire sell. So even if they love your book, if they can't sell it, or if they think they can't sell it, they're not going to take it. And don't blame them for that, because this is their job, and they want to pay their bills. They're dealing with the bean counters. They're dealing with the ad teams and the marketers. So even if they love your book, they have to go before these teams of these horrible salespeople who are all like, well, we're really sure that blue covers are so done and they won't sell anymore, and that book would only have a blue cover, so we're not interested. And they have these conversations, and they have to be able to talk their book past that, which means they have to love it. Don't settle. It's easy to get wound up, but you will have more than one chance. Believe in your work, yes, but also listen to feedback. It's not easy to learn what to listen to and what to ignore, but you need to pay attention to what they're saying. Wait for the right fit. I put on here, wait for true love, and it's a lot like that, especially with an agent. You want to wait for the person, you might go through it. Like me, I'm on my 3rd marriage. You want that one that's really going to work. Oh yeah, this one says, hey girl, I'm sure there's a publisher who wants your 1,200 word picture book. You're just the right girl to pull it off. Well, maybe not. Remember that they're people, and more than that, they are your people. This is your tribe. They may seem like alien other, but all of these people are there because they love book nerds, or they love books. They are grown-up book nerds, okay? So instead of becoming writers, they became agents and editors. But many of them are introverts. They are as introverted as any writer, and they are shy, and they are easily overwhelmed in crowds. They do want to talk to you, they just don't want to be hammered at. So, do get to know them. Make friends with them in a genuine way. Follow their social media. Have non-psycho conversations with them. Learn how to talk about your work without going C-3PO or Ruby Rod. Does everyone remember who Ruby Rod is? From Fifth Element? Yeah. Don't do that. Don't do C-3PO where you just go totally robotic and say these inappropriate things. It's hard to talk about your work without sounding creepy. And I am right there with you because all of us start to get flustered talking about our work because it matters so much. Practice all the time. Learn how to talk about your work a little bit and then to shut up. Right? This is key because we've all been there sitting and talking to some writer who only talks about their work. Learn to listen. Understand their lingo. Know what they mean when they talk about genre and subgenre. Find their preferred method of communication and honor it. Oh, don't be creepy. Really, don't be creepy. Don't unexpectedly call them or visit. Sometimes people walk into their New York offices, which is creepy. Don't try to prove them wrong. Don't trash talk them ever, because they'll know about it. This is why you have real life friends. And remember that you're all in this for the same reason, the sheer joy and love of books. They share it too. They're not the enemy.